Good afternoon. My name is Cassie Findlay. I'm a member of the Support Assange and WikiLeaks coalition. Thank you everyone for coming here today to remind the Australian Government who they're answerable to. Today we've had our Prime Minister Julia Gillard inside Town Hall addressing the New South Wales Labor Conference. Perhaps she spoke about Labor's publicly stated values of social justice, compassion and a fair go for Australians here and overseas. Unless, apparently, you're Julian Assange. Assange and WikiLeaks have, since their US government releases in 2010, been subjected to a barrage of vicious and sustained attacks, legal, reputational and financial, in retaliation for their publishing activities. We know from diplomatic cables from early 2011 that Assange has been the subject of a grand jury investigation in the United States with a view to charging him with espionage, charges that carry a life sentence or the death penalty. His organisation has had supporters or donations blocked by the US banking industry since December 2010, and he himself has been detained without charge for almost 600 days, fighting extradition to Sweden, who are participants in a treaty with the United States that allows quick and easy and secret rendition to the United States. Having exhausted all legal avenues to avoid this fate, he has exercised his right to seek asylum with Ecuador, a country with no such arrangements, and one that he must feel offers him a greater chance of protection from these very serious threats. How extraordinary that an Australian citizen should be pushed to have to take these steps and to feel so abandoned by his own government. And all that our government has been asked to do is to ask the United States, is there a grand jury investigation? Are you building a case to prosecute Assange, a free press publisher and award-winning journalist, for espionage, and on what basis? And how can you let your banking industry get away with this arbitrary and unlawful financial blockade? When asked, Prime Minister Gillard, Attorney General Roxon and Foreign Minister Carr simply repeat that they've been shown no evidence of such things. Carefully worded responses designed to skate over the fact that to actually go and ask these questions would put in jeopardy a militarily and financially beneficial alliance. An alliance that, it seems, trumps a fair go for one of our citizens. We have a two-stage rally today with an amazing lineup of speakers. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our first speaker, Richard Neville. Richard is a stirrer, a futurist and a retired publisher and a great supporter of WikiLeaks and of Julian Assange. Richard.
It used to be so much easier in the olden days. Okay, can anyone hear me? Yes, no, I'm going to take a slightly left of field approach to this. And first thing I want to say is that a few months ago, when Julian Assange started his global chat show on Russian TV called The World, has anyone ever seen that? Yes. Few of you have, okay, good. The mass media came down on him like a ton of bricks. The New York Times referred to him as a nut job. How pleasant is that? The Guardian newspaper suggested Julian was a tool of Putin, a useful idiot. That's what they called him. And Rupert Murdoch's warriors at Fox News stuck to the familiar script. In other words, shoot the son of a bitch, take the punk out. They are all actual quotes from things that really happened, from Fox News to The Guardian. I'd like to know how many of you here have seen some of Julian Assange's Russian TV shows. Can I just get a rough show of hands? Yeah, maybe 10 or 20. It's accessible on the website, it's sharp, and it's smart. Introducing his first guest, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, Julian pulled no punches. He questioned Hezbollah for feigning to support the Arab Spring in Syria, when it had supported it in Tunisia, Yemen and Egypt. And from this moment on, it became clear that Julian was nobody's idiot. It's not often that a radical activist on the run gets to host a TV show on which he is able to round up every other political radical he can get his hands on, okay? And engage them in rigorous discussions on world affairs. And keeping in mind that several of his guests have been tortured in their homelands and are likely to face further prosecution. In some cases, they have ended up running the country, as with Monsef Marzouki, an often tortured radical who became a beacon of the Arab Spring and is now president of Tunisia. Viewers also get to meet El Fattah, the activist blogger who took part in nearly every demonstration that happened in the Egyptian Revolution. And also with him, so this is Julian in the studio with the Egyptian and also the human rights activist Nabil Rajib from, I've just forgotten the country, Bahrain. Okay, all there as radicals exchanging views. Most of the, and anyway, even Bahrain as a kind of beacon has since had his house surrounded. Now the bravery of these guests is absolutely breathtaking. And over the series of this show, the list of them just grew. This is TV like no other. Assange produced these political radicals we rarely get a chance to see, and to see in action, as we sit down, I don't know, dutifully in the land of Oz, eating our little din-dins, having our little sportsy poo, and at the same time, you know, watching old TV footage that's embedded in our tragic brains. That's what happens to us. Assange's out there engaging the world, in finding the activist, in changing the future. And keep in mind that all this, for the time it went, was being produced by Assange under house arrest in Britain. I mean, how cool is that? Now, one of Assange's TV guests was Ecuador's US-educated President Rafael Correa, who spoke lyrically of his fight to stabilize democracy in that country and talked about the threats of the coup, the role of the corporate media, his efforts to protect Ecuador's environment and so forth. So what happened? The two kind of got on like a house on fire. So perhaps there's a glimmer of hope for Julian's asylum quest, but it's a long shot. But watching this TV show brought home to me that all the criticisms of Julian being a narcissistic idiot savant do not account for the fact that his grasp of global politics is breathtaking. When WikiLeaks first screened the footage of the US helicopter gunship slaughtering unarmed civilians in Baghdad, calling it collateral murder, something in the world seemed to shift, ever so slightly. Suspicions long hidden started to emerge. What had once been known only to the few was now seeping into the global skies for all to see. And I would like to ask our Prime Minister why she thinks that it is preferable that the cold-blooded, institutionalized murder of innocent civilians should have been kept secret. Will you see her ask her about that? And then came Cablegate, which deeply embarrassed America and its allies with so many revelations that were at odds with the official stories. So inspired by WikiLeaks, groups such as Anonymous, and I welcome Anonymous here today, welcome them aboard, and who share the WikiLeaks goals of transparency and hacking, of course, to their heart's delight. Now, single individuals also played their part in, well, how shall I put it, storming the Matrix, and have suffered the consequences of which Bradley Manning is the most renowned. In the depths of the blogosphere, there is much paranoia and fear. The Matrix does not always use physical weapons, notes a blogger without a name. It uses information and media-based weaponry, which is well concealed, like a stealth fighter. Silent weapons for quiet wars. All this sounds paranoid, but sometimes the paranoia is justified. As you know, Stratfor is an international security and information company. Late in 2010, a WikiLeaks email revealed an exchange between Stratfor's CEO and co-founder George Friedman and the firm's Sydney-based watch officer, Chris Farnham. Listen to this. Farnham asked Friedman, "Is it possible to revoke someone's citizenship on the grounds of them being a total dickhead? I don't care about the other leaks, but the ones he has made that potentially damage Australian interests upset me. If I thought I could switch this dickhead off without getting done, I don't think I would have too much of a problem." That is from an Australian security agent. It gets worse. Another Stratfor operative soon chimes in. "Sadly, Julian didn't have a car accident on the way." What do you think of that? Finally, there's another comment about Julian marked "not for publication." I quote, "We have a sealed indictment on Assange. Please protect." So how come our politicians are saying Assange is perfectly safe when one of the most oppressive news agencies, secret news agencies in the world, claim to have an indictment? Phew. Oh, and incidentally, the last remark from one of the people from Stratford is, listen to this: "Revenge is a dish best served cold." So mull that over and think about what it means. One thing you can never take away from Julian is his single-minded determination to shine a light in bright places, in the places of darkness. And boy, both he and his colleagues, right, have achieved that. In short, WikiLeaks has done the whole world a favour. They should be getting the Nobel Peace Prize. I'll close now. The saga, however, reminds us of the myth of Plato's cave, an ancient story with a powerful message, involving a group of prisoners locked in a cave and chained to the wall. Their movements are so restricted that all they can see is the flickering images of shadows projected by the people passing in front of a fire behind them. Soon they begin to ascribe meanings and patterns to these shadows, which is as close as the prisoners get to perceiving reality. In other words, it's like most television. However, one man finally escapes the cave, or the Matrix, and he's so amazed by the world outside, the sky, the sun, the birds, that he realizes he must go back to free his friends. But the prisoners mock him, call him crazy. They prefer to harbour their illusions rather than see the world as it really is. So thanks, Julian Assange. Thanks for eating the red pill. Thanks for consuming it on our behalf, and for sharing the experience in front of a global audience and letting the light shine in. May the force be with you, Julian. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. If anyone here is live tweeting the event, the hashtag is rally4JA or GJA4D, which stands for Global Day for Julian Assange. There are events happening all over the world today, July 15, outside the UK Ecuadorian Embassy. There is a vigil. There are events happening in many, many countries across the world. So all those tweeters out there, get the message about this event out into the Twitter sphere. I'd also like to give a plug to badges. There are some awesome badges, a range of designs by that very, very prolific graphic designer who does voluntary work for WikiLeaks, Somerset Bean, and you can get your badges from anyone who's sort of seems to have a bag of them. I'd like now to introduce one of my colleagues from the Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition and Picot, who will be reading a message of support sent by Jim Cassie, who is the Secretary of the New South Wales Fire Brigades Employees Union. Some of you in Sydney would have noticed what they gave the New South Wales Parliament a little cooling down the other day, and he's sent a message of support to the rally.
Yes, Jim sends his apologies. He can't be here today. He has family issues. The thing about the strike that took place last week at the Parliament, of course, it was an illegal strike. They have not been prosecuted, and they won their point because they've actually been forced, the federal government's been forced to restore compensation rights to the fire brigade. So good on you, FBU. This is the example we should be following. He sent us a message to the rally, which I will read to you now. Greetings to you all. Unfortunately, I cannot attend today's rally, but I would like to offer the following words of support. The WikiLeaks organisation is one of the most outstanding investigative outfits in the world. Whilst they have published hundreds of thousands of documents, it's their release of material directly related to war crimes and corporate corruption that is of most relevance to the labour movement. War is a union issue. It diverts much needed resources into the military machine. It is fought by working class people for the benefit of the 1%. It fosters nationalism and racism and divides ordinary people against one another. Likewise, corporate corruption is a union issue. When big capital breaks even its own rules to increase their profits, this directly comes at the expense of people like you and me. WikiLeaks, by exposing some of these realities, strengthens the movement against war, against the 1%, and for a saner world for all. As such, they are to be defended. The current legal action underway against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is a politically motivated attempt to make an example of those who dare embarrass the powerful. The details of Assange's alleged sexual assaults are not the issue here. The threat of extradition to the United States is. If Assange is extradited, it seems certain that he will be charged over his work as a journalist. If this occurs, it will send a message to any journalist considering breaking stories such as WikiLeaks has. This threat is designed to shut down debate, shut down dissent, and deny our movements the information that will help us organise. Whether it's the O'Farrell government here in New South Wales, the war machine of the United States, or the drive to austerity in Europe, there is one thing in common. The powerful hide their abuses as best they may, and exposure of these abuses plays an important part in organising against them, which is why the powerful are so keen to see Assange in Sweden and from there to the US, and why it is so important that this is not allowed to occur. This is not just about Julian Assange, it is about independent journalism and the movements that rely on them. Thank you, Jim Casey.
Thank you, Anne. Our next speaker is Professor Jack Lynch, Director of the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Sydney.
Well, thank you, Cassie, and thank you everyone for turning out. I'm also here as a member of the Executive Council of the Sydney Peace Foundation, which awarded Julian Assange its gold medal in recognition of the importance of his journalism and his courage in standing up for freedom of expression. Yes, his journalism, because WikiLeaks, let us remind ourselves, is a journalistic organisation. What it has been doing is disclosing into the public domain records which governments would rather keep hidden. And in that, it is foursquare in a long and honourable journalistic tradition. It is thanks to journalists that we discovered the Watergate conspiracy was underway to suborn American democracy. It's thanks to journalists that we know, what we suspected at the time, that all these stories about Saddam Hussein's alleged weapons of mass destruction were cooked up by governments. In the words of a leaked memo disclosed by journalists from the British intelligence service MI6, the intelligence and the facts were being fixed around the policy. Now, it's in those circumstances that WikiLeaks can be seen as an upholder of this honourable journalistic tradition, and it has emerged at the very time that we're all now concerned, the Australian government is concerned, about the ability of traditional economic models to sustain quality investigative journalism. So Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are needed now more than ever. So what I thought I would do with my speeches is to remind us of some of the things we know, some of the things we have learned courtesy of WikiLeaks. And I have here a piece of paper in my hand, a souvenir edition of the pre-Gina Rinehart Sydney Morning Herald in its collaboration with WikiLeaks. Two journalistic organisations engaged in a joint investigative project to tell us the truth behind some of the deceitful lines being spun by our own government. In this one, from December the 10th, 2010, we learned that the Australian government, behind the scenes, is well aware that its mission in Afghanistan is essentially doomed. That for all the gallantry of Australian troops on the ground, we are engaged in a futile attempt to prop up a government which is corrupt, inept and ineffectual, the government of Hamid Karzai. A government, of course, whose authority has drained away as it fails to prevent indiscriminate attacks on Afghan civilians by the United States and its allies like Australia. So while Julia Gillard, I don't know if Julia Gillard did mention Afghanistan in her speech. It's one of the many subjects that she affects to avoid or evade in her public comments. But if she did, she might be quite likely to have promised that we will be staying there until the job is done. What is the job, Julia? What is the job? We now know that behind the scenes the Australian government is well aware that the job is futile. Those troops, our troops, are in Afghanistan not to cover the Afghan government, not to do any good in a conflict in Afghanistan, but to cover the collective backside of the Labour cabinet, to deny to Tony Abbott the opportunity to claim that they are weakening in their support for the US military alliance. So Julia Gillard is sending our soldiers into danger, some of them to their deaths, knowing full well that they are engaged in a futile mission. Another story from the same day follows up on a policy document which must rank as the most shrill, deceitful and bellicose to have come out of an Australian government in Canberra for many years. And as you can imagine, that's up against some pretty stiff competition. I'm talking about the so-called Force 2030, the 2009 Defence White Paper, defending Australia in the Asia-Pacific century, which shamelessly whipped up xenophobia over the so-called yellow peril in order to generate justification for spending yet more of our tax money on weapons that we don't need and will never use. The process by which that white paper was drawn up was indeed suborned from the off. by the arms industry. It was chaired, the public consultations were chaired by one Stephen Loosley, a former Labour senator who at that time had just joined the board of Thales Australia, the third biggest so-called defence contractor in the country. It was advised by an advisory panel chaired by Professor Ross Babbage. Ross Babbage, who has passed so many times through the revolving door connecting the defence industry, the Defence Department, and I regret to say academia, that whatever sense of proportion he may have possessed to begin with has evidently been shaken loose along the way. Because Professor Babbage it was who opened the consultation period with a column in the Murdoch Press presaging a war that Australia might fight in the near future against China or India. And he said we had to be equipped to be able to rip the arm off an invading country. Now, the war with India scenario was evidently deemed too fanciful even for the Defence White Paper. But the war with China scenario was in there. And of course, the deceit that is perpetrated on the Australian community, which is exposed by WikiLeaks, the deceit is that we here in Australia, we sport-loving, din-dins eating, sunbathing, it'll be right mate kind of nation, we don't do anything to offend anyone else. We are merely responding to what others do. And if China is building up its military, why then we have to respond. That is the deceit, and that deceit is exposed by WikiLeaks. One of the issues that Julia Gillard refuses to take on, as we know, is to expose and confront racism in the debate over our treatment of asylum seekers. And in order to get out of that, she has kicked the issue into the long grass to a commission of experts chaired by the former Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Houston. What more upstanding public servant could there be? The same Angus Houston who assured the ABC, when this white paper was published, oh no, you've got it all wrong. China doesn't mind that we're going to be beefing up our submarine fleet, playing host to an ever-thickening skein of military connections with the United States, talking up the yellow peril and the Chinese threats and buying ever more weapon systems. No, they're quite happy with it. Actually, that was a lie. As we now know from WikiLeaks, the headline says it all. Chinese furious at military build-up. So when you read one of the enormous number of columns, articles, think tank reports being produced by corporate money here in Australia, maintaining that we have to arm ourselves against an increasingly assertive Chinese threat in the Asia-Pacific, who was it who threatened first? That's the question. We are being plunged into a wasteful and potentially dangerous arms race in our quadrant of the globe at the behest of the arms industry, and we know, thanks to WikiLeaks, that the government is well aware of it, despite what they may say. Just lastly, I think it's important to remember that Julia Gillard, before she became Prime Minister, revealed something of her political instincts when she gave her response to Operation Cast Lead, Israel's illegal assault on the people of Gaza. This was, she declared, nothing more than Israel exercising its legitimate right to defend itself in pursuit of its own security. Now, Australia at that time was one of a small and rapidly dwindling number of countries to join the Bush administration in its dying days in providing diplomatic cover for the Israelis. And it was quite clear that Israel would keep the bombardment going for as long as the diplomatic cover endured. So yes, our government probably was responsible for the prolongation of that attack by a good couple of days at the time. Now finally, the revulsion around the world which was occasioned by this war crime led to the bombardment coming to an end. But that was replaced then by a siege on the people of Gaza, denying them the means to rebuild their homes, denying them medical supplies, and just recently it's emerged their drinking water has become unusable because they cannot import the materials they need to revamp their sanitation systems. Now again, Israel's claim, accepted by the Australian government, is that this siege is necessary for its own security. And thanks to Julian, and thanks to WikiLeaks, we know that that's a lie as well. Because it was WikiLeaks which exposed and disclosed the cables sent from the American ambassador in Tel Aviv giving the truth. That the Israelis had told him the purpose of that siege is to keep the economy of Gaza on the brink of collapse. It is, in other words, a collective punishment and therefore a war crime. Now, just to close, a couple of years ago, a defence minister in the outgoing new Labour government of the United Kingdom, Bill Rammell, made a speech in which he regretted the fact that in this age of media transparency, it was in danger of becoming impossible for governments to wage wars. Now, he made that speech in regret, and he said this was something we had to guard against. We may say, yes, please, let it become impossible to wage wars. For that, we need the disclosure of what is really going on behind the scenes. For that, we are indebted to Julian Assange. We are indebted to WikiLeaks. More power to them.
Thank you, Jake. I've just had a request from the police. Could everyone just move forward so that the pedestrians can get through on that side? That would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. Just open up a bit of space on the edge there. Okay, our next speaker is Kellie Tranter, lawyer and human rights activist. And Kellie is also going to be reading a message of support from a very notable Australian. So thank you, Kellie.
I'll just get my footing. Hang on. I'd like to thank those involved in coordinating today's event and for the invitation to speak. I decided long ago, as no doubt many of you did also, that our government's continuing threats to the fundamental principles we hold so dear leave us no choice but to get involved, to protest, to interfere, and to resist. It is our common sense of injustice that brings us to the steps of the Sydney Town Hall today, and I sincerely thank you for coming and for watching. How fortuitous that this very day the New South Wales ALP are debating and developing policy inside the Town Hall just behind us. The stated basic principles of the ALP New South Wales branch include the recognition and protection of fundamental political and civil rights, including freedom of expression, the press, assembly, association, conscience and religion, the protection of the individual from oppression by the state, and an independent Australian position in world affairs. Let's hope those principles guide their policies. When it comes to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, these principles sadly lie dormant, just words on paper. But as citizens and as voters, it is you and I who can and must give life to them. With the federal election just around the corner, we need as many people as possible to form partnerships, to pool resources, to continue to rally, to speak out publicly and online, to educate others. the Pentagon had refused to help WikiLeaks redact the documents for harm minimisation purposes, and later your officials conceding that they had no evidence that the documents led to anyone's death. Remember being told that some of the individuals referred to in the cables were subsequently jailed, injured or killed. And then the later acknowledgement that it was often hard to show a direct causal link to the State Department cables, because many of the individuals who suffered were already under foreign government scrutiny. Remember being told that WikiLeaks cables worsened US relations with Afghan President Karzai, yet it was recently announced that Afghanistan had become a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Remember being told that US diplomacy would be harmed, and later hearing the US State Department admit that the release of the cables was embarrassing but not damaging. Do you remember Assange being accused of giving aid and comfort to the terrorists who seek to destroy the United States? It's not so long ago that thousands of Australians, citizens, stood here to peacefully protest against joining your government in the invasion of Iraq, only to be accused by our then Prime Minister John Howard of giving comfort to Saddam Hussein.
I was one!
Yay. Accusations like these have plenty of historical precedent. Hermann Goering said at the Nuremberg trials, quote, "The people can always be brought to the bidding of their leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them that they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country," close quotes. All governments have the right to keep legitimate secrets, there's no question about that. But are drone strikes in Yemen, done in your name, a legitimate secret that should be covered up? Is it legitimate to keep secret actions in your name that keep Haitian wages at 31 cents per hour instead of 61 cents? Is it a legitimate secret that your government engaged in a political campaign to block Spanish courts from securing accountability for torture of its citizens at Guantanamo Bay? You couldn't even ask these questions. In fact, you'd have little idea of what the government is doing in your name without the work of Assange, WikiLeaks and its sources. It was an American revolutionary, Patrick Henry, who said, quote, "The liberties of a people never were, nor ever will be, secure when the transactions of their rulers may be concealed from them." Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and its sources have done no more than expose the truth. The truth explains the pain and suffering and misery felt by innocent men, women and children around the world. And it explains the antipathy of other people in other countries and how they feel towards the United States. And it explains why many American citizens feel betrayed by their own government. Yet these people have been brave enough to show the world the truth, and they stand condemned by your government as well as by mine. Over the last 30 years particularly, Australia has become the de facto 51st state of your union. The only matters and issues that receive unquestioning bipartisan support in this country's parliament are all things Washington. Your government's foreign policy wishes become our necessities, and our leaders are too weak to resist. So much so that the cables revealed that our leaders, or that our government, was prepared to work secretly with your government to weaken a key international treaty to ban cluster bombs. You've seen or heard of the damage and injury cluster bombs can inflict. Can you imagine the shame and disgust many of us felt upon hearing that? Our politicians tell us that your government is not interested in extraditing Assange to the United States. They say they don't know what a sealed indictment is, and they deny knowledge of a secret grand jury. But they will never call Assange a journalist, because your Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and many Australian newspaper editors and the Walkley Foundation agree that his work is journalism that invokes First Amendment protection. Our politicians cravenly refuse to stand up for Assange, and they try to hide behind carefully chosen words, no doubt partly in deference to your government's wishes, but no doubt also because our government, like your government, would prefer to keep its grubby secrets from the public gaze. The people of the United States of America have a proud tradition, shining brightly from the time of the Founding Fathers, of standing up against tyranny and fighting for liberty and justice. The citizens of the world, including the citizens of Australia, need the help of the American people to ensure that no government, including the Australian government and our government and the United States government, tries to punish Assange or WikiLeaks for doing no more than publishing the truth, from lifting the veil of secrecy from sordid narratives and permitting the common person to see what government does in his or her name. We all have to stand up against this, and the principles can hardly be better expressed than they were by two of your presidents. John Adams, your second president, warned us that the jaws of power always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out, if possible, to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing. And Abraham Lincoln later marked our obligation: to sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. I sincerely hope that all Americans will heed those great voices and not sin by silence, but stand in protest against this threat to our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kellie, for those amazing words. At this point in the rally, we have a short march, and we're going to be forming over in front of the town hall steps, and there's going to be a chant led by one of our group, after which we'll circle back here for the remainder of our speakers, including Bruce McAleer from the MUA, Fred Fuentes, the convener of the Latin American Social Forum, and Irene Dartney, Greens councillor for the City of Sydney. And then we'll provide you with some information about what you can do to take action and to help. But to join us in our march, we'll be forming over in that area just in front of the steps. So, I can't hear you. The banner to follow is right behind you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back here very shortly.
People have a right to know Assange and Manning. People have a right to know Assange and Manning. People have a right to know Assange and Manning. People have a right to know Assange and Manning. The justice, the peace. Hands up, WikiLeaks, the justice, the peace. The justice, the peace. The justice, the peace.
Hands up, WikiLeaks.
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 The justice, the peace. Hands up, WikiLeaks. The justice, the peace.
Hands up, WikiLeaks.
The justice, the no peace.
Hands off WikiLeaks!
No justice, 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 no peace.
Julian is one of ours. Obama is one of theirs. Hands off WikiLeaks. Free speech now. Hands off WikiLeaks. Free speech now. Hands off WikiLeaks. Free speech now. Hands off WikiLeaks. Free speech now.
more. We want more. No justice, no peace. Hands up, WikiLeaks. No justice, no peace. 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 No justice, no peace.
Telling us the truth, not our government's face. You must be let go. We have a right to know. All these seekers are bloody disgrace. Singing, we will free you. We will free you. WikiLeaks worldwide are all okay. But it's all over the place. We want to see what our government does. All these seekers are bloody disgrace. We will free you. We will free you. Government's silent, keep it to the party line instead of working for Australians' rights. They're doing everything for the Washington don't. What we want is Julian Hall. We will free you. We will free you. He's gonna go on. We will free you.
no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Fantastic! What an amazing sight seeing everyone come down George Street. That's fantastic. Welcome back, everyone. We've got some more really amazing speakers coming up very soon, including Fred Fuentes from the Latin American Social Forum and Irene Downey, the Greens Councillor for the City of Sydney. And also Paul McAleer, who I apologise, I believe I called Bruce earlier. We'll also be hearing from Paul McAleer. But before we do that, we have a message from a very eminent Australian, a minister from the Whitlam Government, a retired judge, a QC, Mr. Kep Enderby, who is very elderly and unable to join us today, but felt very passionately that he wanted to send a message, which will be read by Kellie Tranter.
Hello again, everyone. This is from Kep. He sent this through on Friday, and he apologised for not being able to make it, but his thoughts are certainly with us. Thank you for letting me make this statement. Can you hear me now? Up the back, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for letting me make this statement without being present with you today. Having entered my 87th year, I am not as mobile these days as I would like to be. For those of you who may not know my name, I was a minister in Whitlam's government in the 1970s and his Attorney General in 1975 at the time when the government was dismissed by John Kerr. I was a co-founder with others, mainly Ken Buckley, It seems there aren't many great causes these days, although those of Julian Assange and Bradley Manning are two of them. They deserve all the support they can be given, even if laws have been broken, and I am not saying they have been. There are good laws, and bad laws should be changed. Public opinion can help do that. You'll remember that the Americans were doing an injustice to David Hicks in Guantanamo Bay, until public opinion here in Australia eventually forced the Australian government to intervene and play a part in having Hicks released into its custody. I know from discussions with Major Murray, Hicks's American lawyer, that he was able to negotiate a sort of settlement with the American court because of that change of attitude by the Howard government. Hicks still had to serve a number of years in prison. He still eventually, however, got out. I like to think that I may have played perhaps some very small part in helping get public opinion moving on what was always an injustice. I spoke on the Robin Williams program and wrote articles and letters highlighting how the Americans were keeping him imprisoned indefinitely. The Howard government eventually got the message the public was sending it. There is something terribly wrong going on in both the Assange and Manning cases, and we are being told very little about it. Sweden's sex laws are unrealistically repressive, the most repressive in the world. That was made clear in the recent ABC interview with Philip Adams and in a recent book by Oscar Schwartz, A History of Sex in Sweden. Bradley Manning has been in custody for long periods of solitary confinement on the ground that he might injure himself, despite psychiatric opinion to the contrary and despite public protest that it amounts to pre-trial punishment without being brought to a trial. He was arrested more than 2 years ago. America still uses the ancient, archaic, Old English, medieval grand jury system of determining whether a criminal trial should take place to determine whether a person has committed a serious crime or not. With all its scope for the manipulated injustice, during the hearing the target of a grand jury, the person perhaps to be an accused, cannot put on a defence. In America, in Virginia, a federal grand jury has already commenced investigating WikiLeaks, which means Julian Assange, to determine whether an indictment should be served on him. Eminent commentators are claiming that the evidence is mounting that the WikiLeaks case is part of a much broader campaign by the Obama administration to crack down on all leakers. Public opinion can make a great difference in determining that such a prosecution not take place. Such a situation as not very different from what eventually happened in the case of David Hicks. Think of the different amount of attention given by the Australian government to Assange's case compared to that given to the case of the Australian woman solicitor in Libya by Bob Carr, our Foreign Affairs Minister. It can't be that Assange has a bad reputation. He is the recipient of many awards testifying as to his courage and excellence as a journalist and about him generally. The Age refers to him as one of the most intriguing people in the world, an internet's freedom fighter. American prisons don't have the best of reputations these days. Unfortunately, there are understandable reasons for that. Think of the secret prisons it has scattered all around the world. Think of its use of what it calls rendition. Think of its use of waterboarding, or what we would call torture. Think of Guantanamo Bay. Think of Abu Ghraib. There is evidence that the revelations by WikiLeaks helped bring the atrocities at Abu Ghraib to light. Ladies and gentlemen, I have said enough. I give you all the support I can. Thank you, Kep.
Thank you so much, Kellie. Before I introduce our next speaker, a short plug. Colin, who provides this PA equipment for us and does a lot of voluntary work for the Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition, has some awesome T-shirts, bags and badges. Bags, stickers and patches on WikiLeaks, so I'll commend them to you. Our next speaker is Paul McAleer, Sydney Branch Secretary, the Maritime Union of Australia.
Hello you all, they still call me Bruce. I'm alright with that, I don't mind. Comrades and friends, congratulations for this wonderful turnout for this incredibly important international event. I'd like to thank all of the previous speakers and the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event. Assange should be questioned in relation to the sexual assault claims made against him. Questioned in the United Kingdom, as he has given the Swedish authorities the ability to do so. They will not agree to this, because if they did, it would shatter the myth that has been created to demonise Assange and divide his supporters. Bradley Manning is a hero whose act of bravery allowed another generation of people a keen insight into the terrorist activities of the United States, their government and the military. Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks platform is a symbol of truth against the lies and hypocrisy of the capitalist dictatorship. This issue is fundamentally about democracy, and not the bullshit democracy that we see in our media, but real democracy, true democracy, based on truth. We see the fake democracy trumpeted by Western governments trying to hide their acts of barbarity against their own citizenry and crimes against humanity committed around the planet silenced. People are allowing their rights to be swallowed up in the false belief that their nation states will provide them with the necessities of life. It is a lie all too easily swallowed. The reason for this is propaganda, information used to justify or manufacture support for an issue. Without WikiLeaks, without Assange, without the bravery of real journalists and not the fake corrupted journalists of most newspapers, we would not have the truth to dissect in the first place. We would question why. It is legal to blow a kid's head off with the most technological of missiles, and illegal to publish material which showcases the truth as to why that kid is now dead. Assange and WikiLeaks created a platform not only for information about war crimes and Western governments' collaboration with corporations in smashing the rights of citizens, but also created a platform where the mass media had to release the information that WikiLeaks and Assange gave them. If they didn't, someone would, and people would flock to an alternative media source for further information. The appetite for knowledge in the news cycles made it necessary for the mass media to get the scoops out as quickly as possible. That is how Assange and WikiLeaks became so important, and in the end, so dangerous so quickly. Information rarely that would be published suddenly became available. People became more sceptical about their governments, less trusting in their lies they were being sold, and that is the crime of WikiLeaks and Assange in the eyes of the capitalist dictatorship. Undermining criminal governments through the truth is a dangerous business. Activists the world over have suffered, have been tortured, have been shot, brutalised and locked up for decades for having the audacity to question the corrupted lies of governments and the corporations. It's true, there's so many people who have stood up for justice who find themselves in jail. They've been brutalised by police forces, they've been smashed into the ground simply for raising the truth, for having their guts to stand up against gutlessness, against the acts of people who are not brave and who are in fact criminals. Those wondering why Assange has sought asylum in Ecuador should not be surprised by the fact that Ecuador is moving away from corporate media. something the West fears as a return to people's media, a return to truth, a move away from 1984 style ownership of information and the hiding of that truth. When free media is that media in which is owned by billionaires and not the people, Assange becomes essential to support. Do we support Assange? When people exposing terrorist governments are jailed for exposing that truth, Assange becomes essential to support. Do we support Assange? When corporate lies, corruption and theft are the enemy of the people, Assange becomes essential to support. Do we support Assange? When governments can collaborate with corporate plunderers against the interests of people through secret networks out of the reach of the people, Assange becomes essential to support. Do we support Assange? If we believe that Guantanamo should be free from scrutiny, if we believe that soldiers on whatever side who murder simply are mistakes free from scrutiny, missiles dropped onto the houses of innocents is just a price we all have to pay for democracy, then do nothing for Assange, WikiLeaks or Bradley Manning. Do we support Assange? If the murder of truth, innocence and justice is something we believe is necessary in order for us to be free, then continue to turn a blind eye and allow Assange, Manning and WikiLeaks to be marginalised and criminalised. Do we support Assange? If you believe in truth, real democracy and justice, then continue to rally for Assange, Manning and WikiLeaks until they are all held in the regard they deserve. Do we support Assange? The hypocrisy we are witness to is sickening. We are the US President that was given a Nobel Peace Prize who acts as a hitman, who has been Commander-in-Chief of an army that has continued illegal wars of occupation and murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And we have a soldier in Bradley Manning who is behind bars for releasing the truth. How sick is the society in which we live that allows this to happen? When the truth becomes illegal and the truth becomes the enemy, we are all in trouble. Each and every one of us. It is our duty to rise against this. It is our duty to defy this. And if acting illegally is necessary to secure justice, then let us all become outlaws. If the union movement in this country believes in truth and democracy, then we must support Assange. If the people of this country value truth and democracy, then we must, as a duty and responsibility, support Assange. The threat to Assange is a real one. Bradley Manning is behind bars. Evidence has been produced that demonstrate that the US want to prosecute Assange. He's been labelled as a terrorist. WikiLeaks is a terrorist organisation by American politicians. The capitalist dictatorship is without equal. Is without equal in its ability to contradict itself in the same sentence and look us right in the eye and telling us what they're doing is right. This dictatorship is the fabric that unites us all in economic slavery and political ignorance, that allows for a society to be politically deaf, dumb and blind. If any editor is to be jailed, it should be those whose subservience to capitalism and warmongering is unquestionable, who allow their billionaire owners to brainwash the people with lies and through their corrupted journalism and lack of political accountability. Political accountability is one of the only ways that the people can expose their leaders' fraud. The WikiLeaks helped to do this. WikiLeaks and Assange helped expose a world of criminal collaboration of governments and corporations. When it was in African countries, Assange was a hero, lauded the world over. As soon as he started exposing the Americans' war crimes, he became a terrorist. Being labelled a terrorist by the United States has almost become honourable, except if it wasn't so dangerous for your health. The strangulation of WikiLeaks has become accepted by the gullible and ignorant, much in the same way that the illegal blockade against Cuba is done. Just like the economic blockade against Cuba is trying to starve one of the bravest countries on earth, the blockade against WikiLeaks is trying to starve into extinction one of the bravest media organisations on earth. Democracy is under attack in ways that we have rarely seen before. If true democracy is not fought for, we end up with fascism. And how far away are we from this abomination? Those who fight in the streets against hostile governments are freedom fighters. Those against friendly governments, no matter their crimes, are terrorists. Americans are maced in their faces for asking questions like, why is my community poverty-stricken, yet corporations are making billions of dollars out of that poverty? I'm almost finished. The criminalisation of truth is a weapon of all those whose corruption maintains their power. The coward media in this country must ask themselves whether turning a blind eye to true journalism, or to true journalists' possible incarcerations for exposing the truth is an attack on them all or not. The ones who answer no are simply the servants of this criminal capitalist dictatorship. We must always remember that Bradley Manning is still behind bars while we are free. WikiLeaks, Manning and Assange, continue your fight. The MUA Sydney branch will be with you all the way.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. Our next speaker is Kellie Tranter. Fred is a co-convener of the Latin American Social Forum here in Sydney and a supporter of WikiLeaks and Assange. And perhaps, you know, he might, as many people have said to me today, remind us all that we could be writing to President Correa of Ecuador to urge him to favourably consider Julian Assange's application for asylum. Thank you, Fred.
Well, like many of you, when we woke up that morning to hear the news that Julian Assange had sought asylum in the Ecuador embassy, we as a Latin America Social Forum, a coalition of Latin American community groups and solidarity activists from countries such as Chile, Uruguay, Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua, we knew we had to respond immediately, and there was two reasons for that. The first was because we have no doubt that Julian Assange's life is in danger. We know that we can expect nothing of this current Australian government to defend his rights. They were rushing over themselves to accuse him of being guilty. They didn't know what he was guilty of, they just knew he was already guilty. The federal police had to then tell him that actually he had committed no crime. But yet the persecution of Julian Assange by the Australian government continues. Julian knew that, and he knew he had to find asylum somewhere else. We are also absolutely 100% sure that he will get no help from the US government. As Latin American solidarity activists, we know of the long history of attempts to silence, assassinate, kill individuals and entire peoples that have tried to rise up against US imperialism, against the role of the US in Latin America. Military dictatorships that have come on the backs of tens of thousands of people being killed, all of them funded by the US. Why on earth wouldn't they want to get Assange? And I think Rafael Correa, in his interview with Julian Assange, summed it up very nicely as to why the US hates Assange so much. Because he raised an old story that has been mentioned by other Latin American presidents, and they've asked the question, well, why is it that a military coup has never happened in the US? And the simple answer is because there's no US embassy in Washington. Well, when you reveal the truths of what the US embassies are doing in Latin America and all over the world, you can rest assured the US government will come for you. But we also knew as well that we have no faith in the Swedish government to do anything. And we have a very specific case study of why we do not trust the Swedish government in any way to protect the rights of Julian Assange. And I'll tell a story of a journalist, Joaquin Perez Becerra. He was a journalist in Colombia, he lived in Colombia, he was elected councillor of a left-wing group called the Patriotic Union. Because of the threat that this party represented, 4,000 of their members were killed. He went to exile, he's picked Sweden as his country of exile. He has lived there for the last 20 years, he has his family there, he is a Swedish citizen. Today this journalist is in a Colombian jail and the Swedish government is doing nothing to protect this journalist. A journalist that had to flee from Colombia and is now facing supposed charges of terrorism. What is the Swedish government doing for its own citizen? Nothing. What can we expect them to do for Julian Assange? Much less. But we also knew we had to respond not just to defend Assange, but to defend Ecuador. Because we knew immediately, as soon as he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, that they would also use this to attack Ecuador, as they have already been doing for a number of years. And so it began in the media. The Ecuadorian government. Why would Assange pick the Ecuadorian government, which apparently has one of the worst records in regards to freedom of speech? Well, we really know when the corporate media speaks about freedom of speech, what they're really talking about is their ability to control what is able to be said and not heard. And the Ecuadorian government has very much been leading the way in breaking down this corporate power. When Correa came to power, 6 of the major 8 newspapers were owned by banking corporations. Now you can imagine there might be a slight conflict of interest that occurs when you both own a bank and a newspaper in the current global economic crisis, but also the banking crisis that happened in Ecuador in the 90s. What did the newspapers do there? They reported nothing about the banking crisis. They in fact signed a deal, which was revealed by WikiLeaks because of the US Embassy cables, where these banking corporations and newspapers sat down and said, we will not report any of this because that way none of our interests are touched. Well, the Ecuadorian government and its people have drafted up a new constitution. In that constitution, if you are a banker, you are no longer allowed to own any media outlets. That's a pretty important start, I think, for breaking down the corporate power over the media. But that wasn't enough, because a few years later, they held another referendum to further amend the Constitution. And now the Constitution reads that anyone who is involved in the media industry are not allowed to have any other business interests anywhere else. Because of course, once you do start to have other business interests, maybe someone like Gina Reinhardt, this is obviously going to become an issue when you begin to report on that. Yep. So I think there's a very clear reason of why they want to get Assange. I think there's a very clear reason of why they're going to attack Ecuador, and I think that's why it's so important that we are here today, both to support Assange, but I do urge people to also show the support with the Ecuadorian government. Let's show them that millions of people around the world are willing to support them if they take the defiant stand of basically saying to the US, we don't care, we are going to defend Assange, we are going to give him asylum. We know we need to do that, we need to continue to do that, but I think we need to do one more thing as well. We need to take the lessons of governments like Ecuador and of other people around the world and use that information that WikiLeaks has made available to us to really begin to fight for real change. Because that information is only powerful when people like ourselves take that into our hands and make use of that information in order to fight for a better world. So I think that's why I want to finish up by congratulating the organisers today and congratulate everyone that's here. And let's hope that we continue to build that campaign to defend Assange, to defend Ecuador, and to fight for that better world we all want to see.
Thank you, Fred. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Irene Doubtney, Greens Councillor for the City of Sydney.
Hi. It's a hard lot of acts to follow this afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Aboriginal land, Gadigal land, land that was never ceded, sold or given away. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land, always was and always will be. This is also the homeland of Julian Assange, and it is reprehensible that the Australian government ignores its obligations to protect and support one of its own citizens in his time of need. Rather than defend our citizens, we are opening our borders, our Northern Territory, to American troops and proving that we are truly a client state rather than an independent nation. As a client state, we are too cowardly to take an independent stance on protecting Julian Assange. The government is too busy towing the American line. But we have seen that no country wants to take the risk of upsetting the United States in its vendetta against WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. We know that he currently sits in the Ecuadorian embassy awaiting a decision that will only give him a temporary reprieve and could see him end up in a country where his safety will be far from guaranteed. However, it is highly unlikely that Assange will ever be able to leave the embassy without being arrested the moment he sets foot on British soil. How he can even get to the airport without being arrested is a matter for speculation. And it is highly unlikely that this will be more than a temporary reprieve in the ongoing extradition battle. The publishing of the Iraq and Afghanistan war diaries and the trench of diplomatic cables showed the true nature of government and the power it wields on the global stage. The War Diaries, particularly the film of the heartless murder of an Iraqi journalist, his cameraman and countless innocent civilians, shocked the world and exposed the great disconnect between the American use of power and the fate of innocent Iraqi citizens and citizens around the world. The growing use of remotely controlled weaponry, the use of central command stations has dehumanised and desensitised military operations to the extent where it's just another video game. This is particularly true where drones are concerned, which are becoming rapidly the new face of government power, whether it's civil or military. WikiLeaks showed the true face of power, and its continuing release of cables and documents highlighted the dysfunctional nature of power relations across the world. By exposing these cables and documents, WikiLeaks gave power to ordinary people to see government for what it really is. For most people who saw the video or read the cables, the truth highlighted the real David and Goliath nature of the US war machine versus the ordinary people of the world. This is the real crime that Julian Assange faces. It's not really about dubious rape claims and murky political manoeuvrings in Sweden. It is about the crime of exposing the nature of the state in all its cruelty, pettiness and ridiculous posturing. Now that we have seen the workings of government, we can never go back to the innocence of the pre-WikiLeaks days. We have a duty to protect WikiLeaks and Julian Assange from the heavy boot of power and the neoliberal system it supports. The blockade of WikiLeaks by the likes of Visa, MasterCard and PayPal showed the way big business and the state work together against anyone who dares to expose in a critical manner the Machiavellian nature of power. Last time I spoke, I referred to the importance of truth-telling and how our governments hide the truth and feed people thought bubbles and doublespeak. Our war reporters are embedded with the coalition's troops in Afghanistan, and rarely do we see any real analysis in the mainstream media, which was so beautifully pointed out by Jake Lynch earlier. It's all patriotism and flag waving, but little understanding of what is really happening on the ground. We rightly mourn our fallen soldiers, but how little space is given to the suffering of the fallen people of Afghanistan. Rarely do we see stories about how the behaviour of the coalition's troops and the dreaded arbitrariness of drones are feeding the ranks of the Taliban. We need an independent press to give people a picture of the real world and the machinations of government. We need an organisation like WikiLeaks to keep us informed as they have done in the past. In a world where the Olympic Games, once a celebration of peace, have been hijacked by this siege mentality, with batteries of rockets on apartment buildings, 36,000 troops to keep the peace, and drones circling overhead. We realise that the dystopian future that has been predicted by so much science fiction is with us now. It is a world at a tipping point in every way, and it is essential that organisations like WikiLeaks are able to operate and release information that has always been hidden from regular people like us. It is a world where people are saying enough is enough, and movements like Occupy Wall Street and Anonymous are standing up against the establishment. It is a world that needs its WikiLeaks. The Greens have stood behind this movement, and we will continue to call for the Australian government to support Julian and in his precarious position as it stands at the moment. Free Bradley Manning, support Julian, and let's keep WikiLeaks keeping the bastards honest. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. And the Greens have been incredible supporters of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, particularly Senator Scott Ludlam. and Irene and many other politicians of the Greens Party. I'd now like to introduce our final speaker for the day, Gail Malone from the Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition, who's going to tell you how you can take action and assist in the fight to support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Gail.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. WikiLeaks is a gift to history. We have now for the first time the ability to write history not only through the eyes of the victors. WikiLeaks has become a leveller between people and government. It has ushered in an age where we, the people, have access to information once deemed for their eyes only. For years, Australia has wantonly participated in brutal, unnecessary wars in the name of freedom and democracy, as excessive governments can't seem to say no to the US. Thanks to the courageous work of WikiLeaks, we have an in-depth resource enabling us to put these wars into perspective and make informed decisions as to whether we, the Australian people, think our involvement is wise and in our national interest. Both in the Afghan and Iraq war releases, they tell a different story than our government and the MSN would have us believe. It is becoming more apparent that the government's idea of national interest is in conflict with our own. We have learned that the dire situation the people seeking asylum go through, and it suits certain members in our parliament. WikiLeaks' US Embassy cables revealed the truth in the agenda behind Stop the Boats. We know that a 5-country cartel of Australia, US, Canada, South Africa and Switzerland have joined forces to promote mining interests at the expense of Indigenous people and their land. We have learned from the Stratfoil email release that our government is just a bit too chummy with the US, and which ministers were communicating with the US in a manner some would regard as treason and or spying. We learned the once faceless men of the Labor Party felt Gillard would be more pragmatic as a Prime Minister than Rudd. We learned that our government was happy to serve Julian Assange to the US regardless of his innocence or his Australian citizenship. We have learned, and this cannot be disputed, that our government is sycophantic in the extreme towards the US, and we are hardly more than a client state, with the government lacking the maturity to think for themselves, regardless what Australian people want. We have only recently started to see the latest WikiLeaks release, the Syria files. The release not only allows us to see the machinations of big business and governments regarding Syria, but it, like previous releases, is a remarkable resource for education and training. These things are a gift to history from WikiLeaks. We here today are in the eye of the storm in history. Australia should be proud of WikiLeaks and its Editor-in-Chief, Julian Assange, in the fight not only for freedom of speech, but freedom generally. We need to give backing to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Our government has tried ignoring us. We have written, called, emailed our MPs and senators, often having to inform them of the irregularities of the case. We have used resources like justiceforassange.com to get facts out. We have grown in numbers, and it's our numbers that dictate how long they will ignore us. We must continue to talk to others and inform them. Take to the streets as we have today, ad nauseum. You can sign up to the mailing list for Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition. The mailing list will keep you abreast of actions. All the info you need is on the flyers that have been circulating. Our government must know we are not willing to lose such an important Australian to their career whims. You can help by purchasing the WikiLeaks CD or donating at WikiLeaks Beat the Blockade site. There is also an array of quality merchandising from wikileaks.org, or you can throw some coins in the buckets here today or purchase a badge. It is an expensive business fighting bogus charges, an unfair financial blockade, and manage the most prolific media outlet the world has ever seen. Now, although there has been a win in Iceland regarding the visa blockade, visa will be appealing. So keep WikiLeaks and Julian Assange in your hearts. Help them, help us to leave a free world for the future. Last month, Senator Ludlam moved that the prejudicial statements made by senior government members be retracted with the backing of the coalition. I asked Senator Ludlam on Twitter, is there a time frame for Gillard et al. To retract the prejudicial statements regarding Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? He replied, well, I think their time frame is never. So your homework, we can start writing, telling MPs, and the Prime Minister particularly, Attorneys General, both Roxon and McClelland, and our Foreign Minister, to honour this motion and demand they protect Julian Assange. If history is indeed written by the victors, this is a battle we cannot afford to lose. Let truth be victorious. And now I'd like to introduce Dennis Aubrey with a song he's written, Dirty Little Secrets.
Thank you. Chivalry is not dead. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Now, I was going to sing a song about drone warfare that I wrote a while back, which I sent to the folks here recently. And yesterday I got home and I think this needs to be taken back a bit. Yesterday was the 100th birthday of Woody Guthrie. And the ghost of Woody Guthrie came to me yesterday and gave me a song. Woody Guthrie had a sticker on his guitar that said, "This machine kills fascists." I was thinking about getting one that had a picture of the richest woman in the world and say, "This machine kills fat shits." Now I want you to help me sing this. The chorus goes, "Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore." Let's try that again. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. It's hard to keep a secret in the age of information. One little button pushed and it's out there to every nation. Everybody understands the current situation because Julian Assange is around. And your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Now this is my favourite verse. The last line of this verse is my favourite, okay? Now those who want to hide the truth in the killing industry have a vested interest that they hide from you and me. They spend a bloody lot of money on security, but it doesn't work so well now they found. And your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're sorry. Well, dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Once upon a time, back when I was in my youth, The US Army war machine would cover up the truth. But they can't do that anymore, cause now we've got the proof of the way they throw their weight around. And your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing that they did time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Now we hope they don't get Assange, but we know they might, but it won't kill the message, and we know that it's right. The truth is out there, and Assange turned on the light. He should not have to live underground. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Thank you.
That's it, everyone. We've finished with the formal proceedings, but do stay. Sign the petition, sign our mailing list, buy a badge, buy a bag. Support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Thanks everyone for coming.